This legislative body exhibits enormous concern and empathy for all Oregonians, citizens, non-citizens, every person in Oregon. And we have a record of history, if I may refer to a document.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is abortions funded by Oregon Health Plan in the fiscal years from 2002 to 2013-14. And in that document, there are published 40,000 abortions in the state of Oregon. Given this discussion and our concern with regard to protecting lives and humans and having a view of our human life that says we will not take the life of an innocent human being without justification. Can you describe for me some of the justifications that were presented to Oregon Health Authority for taking these 40,000 lives?
Mr. President, to the question, we are in a state where current law makes choice available to women, which I believe it should. Nothing in this bill changes current law in defining who is a person or at what point life begins. That is not the intent of the bill. It does not change that law. In Oregon, the public has funded abortions since 1978, publicly funded abortions. Most of the savings within this bill come from actually the other types of care that are in this bill. In fact, most of the savings in this broad spectrum of reproductive care, there's been calculations that it saves approximately $7 for every dollar that we invest. But again, there is nothing in this bill that changes the legality of abortion or changes the definition of a person or changes the definition of where life begins. This entire bill is about giving access to the rights that women have to make the choice that they choose to make.
Follow up.
Would the carrier yield to a question?
Yes, Mr. President.
The carrier will yield.
Thank you for your yield. Because this does not deal with that issue of where life begins or what a human being looks like and when they gain that status, is it appropriate to say that we are now asking taxpayers to fund without justification the taking of an innocent human life in the form of a fetus?
The question, Mr. President, and to the carrier is, are we asking the public to pay for, based on what justification for the taking of what the questioner is defining as human life? The reality is that this does not change in terms of defining who a person is or when life begins. The determination of what is the justification for when a woman ultimately makes this choice, which I clearly believe the choice is hers, rests with her in terms of what she believes the decision should be, not with the public at large.
Follow up.
Would the carrier yield to a question?
Yes, Mr. President.
The carrier will yield.
Thank you. Because it does rest with her, and your claim is it doesn't rest with the public at large, does that mean the taxpayer has no say in how their monies are spent?
Mr. President, to the question is, does the taxpayer have any say with how their dollars are spent? I think the reality of that is that this procedure, abortion, is legal in this state. It is up to the decision of the woman to make that decision, and this legislature and previous legislatures have chosen to fund these with public dollars.
Follow up?
Will the carrier yield to a question?
Yes, Mr. President.
The carrier will yield.
Because this is, in your mind, about funding, I'm curious as to how you expect this body to fund things that the taxpayer has no say in. For example, what we typically do is we typically respond to constituents' concerns, and then we fall out in different lines about those concerns. But this is a single individual woman's choice, according to your language and terminology. It has nothing to do with the individual that she's carrying in her womb, which also, as an individual, ought to have the right of representation. Is that true?
Mr. President, to the question, to the ability that I can answer it, I respectfully disagree with the question in how it's posed. This body has made the decision to fund as one of the reproductive services that women can choose to receive abortion.
To the bill. Thank you, Mr. President. The issue here is really quite simple. What we're talking about is the unjustified taking of an innocent human life. With regard to capital punishment, we can justify the taking of a life because of guilt or because of other circumstances, extenuating circumstances. This happens to be unjustified taking of an innocent human life. That human has done nothing to warrant a death sentence. And we might be wondering, well, is it really a human or not? Maybe it's too small to be a human. You may be, Mr. President, you maybe had time to spend the 4th of July with a picnic and children running around and playing in the water and the sunshine and whatever. When is their life not worth protecting? Is it worth protecting just because, quote, they're a mass of cells? Let's look at what we know. When a woman is pregnant, something is growing inside of her, and it's not her. It's not a watermelon. It's not a blue whale, and it's not bluebonnet flowers either. What is growing inside of a woman? We know from science that it's a unique individual. It's got the DNA of a human being at moment of conception. At the moment of conception, two mature reproductive cells, one from a father's sperm and one from a mother's egg, unite, join, and create a brand new, unique, never ever seen before individual that we know is a human being. If it were cancer, we could cut it out. If it were a tumor, we would all approve of using taxpayer fundings to remove that tumorous growth, especially if it's malignant. It turns out this isn't a malignant growth. This isn't cancer. This is the DNA of a unique human individual. And it's not that it's small, because we know there are little people here in this room. In fact, baby Rosa was being held earlier today. Baby Rosa isn't less human because she's so small. My son and his wife had twins 8 weeks ago. They're nearly 10 pounds now. They're not less human because of their size. They're actually not less human because of their level of development either. They're entirely dependent on someone else. They're entirely dependent on mom and dad. They're entirely dependent on others, just as the baby in the womb is entirely dependent on mom for sustainability of life. It cannot happen without us giving our all to the birth and growth and development of these young people. And so what we're faced with is an issue: where do we decide at some magic point it's okay to take an innocent human life? Maybe it's because they're inside the womb. If one of us weren't here right now, would we be less important? Are we more important because we're here is the real question. Are we more important because we're here and the guys at the mission don't count? We all deny that. Every one of us denies that concept, that we're more important here versus out in the hallway or up in the gallery or at Mahonia Hall. Our place in life is transient and contingent. We grow, we move, we develop. We have inherited these gifts from our parents, and we're now about developing those gifts and using those gifts, and our location has nothing to do with our humanness. So now this body is willing, without justification, to take an innocent human life? I think not. I think taxpayers throughout the state cringe at the idea of taking life without justification. And yet here we are arguing this point like this is worth us fighting for and dying on our little progressive and conservative hills. It is worth a fight because these are innocent human lives, and we should be about protecting each and every one of them. Our tax dollars should not be funded to promote gender-based abortions. How do we know how many of these abortions, 40,000 in the last 10 years, how do we know how many of these 40,000 are actually women who were purposely destroyed because they were women? How many of them were men and purposely destroyed because they were men? You realize the Chinese national policy has fomented a tremendous population disparity between men and women. In fact, now they're promoting not a one-child policy, but they're promoting a two-child policy to try and even out the score. But once you've already been at destroying a portion of your population based on gender, you're at actually destroying the very fabric of your culture. Potentially 20,000 females destroyed. This isn't a bill about female reproductive health or female health. How about autism? Are these children being identified as Down syndrome or autism? Are they being identified and destroyed for those reasons? How many of these 40,000 had the potential to be autistic? Given the statistics that we're aware of, we know it's somewhere around 750 to 1,000 of these children were potentially autistic. What's interesting about that is that means all of the others, the other 39,000 of these, were perfectly healthy and legitimate humans in the cusp of life. And this body is willing to use taxpayer dollars to terminate that on the spot. I have a granddaughter who is 2 years old. She's 2 years old tomorrow, actually. And she was adopted from an out-of-state out of state birth mom and birth father. She's a little beautiful girl, and in this state, the very day before she was born, she could have been aborted.